So, hello everyone, and welcome to the Reimagining Therapy podcast. I am joined today by Sara-Louise Ackrill. I'm super psyched to speak with her. We've been chatting on LinkedIn, and as you know, this podcast is about looking at the intersections between therapy, coaching, and how we can make well-being more accessible and understandable to the people who need it, and also how we can drive the industry forward. And what really intrigued me about talking with Sarah is that she comes from a very unique perspective in that she is a traditionally trained counselor and therapist, and then decided to go an independent route, develop her own integrative methodology, integrating counseling and coaching. And I'm just super psyched to find out more about that. And then on top of it, I mean, because as some of the podcast listeners will know, I'm neurodivergent, I'm ADHD, and Sarah is also neurodivergent and has written a book about neurodiversity. So I'm just so excited to hear about, Sarah, your practice, your book, and all of that stuff.
Thank
So
you.
welcome.
Hi. Wow. No, this is great. I think I like to do interviews and podcasts and things, but I love this topic. I don't often get time to talk about or chance to talk about this thing. So this is really exciting for me too.
Amazing. Thank you. A bit of a flavor of, who you are, but I would love, for everyone listening to also know what you do. So would you like to just, introduce yourself, figure yourself out, and share what we need to know?
Sure. Sure. Thank you. So I am a therapist and coach. I have a hybrid model, which we'll go into. I finished my training 12 years ago. And I went into support and information and guidance because at the time you don't just come out of training and have a caseload. And I wanted to go an independent route. And so I deliberately set out to pick up as many life skills or to help people with those life skills as possible, because I felt that therapy needed to be a bit more practical and get its sleeves rolled up and really help people at grassroots level. So I've always had very strong beliefs about what therapy is and isn't. And in 2020, I became an entrepreneur. So I now work across 12 different projects with neurodiversity. And I have a large team. So we are 32 now at Wired Differently, which is my main organization. But I also have Start Differently, which is a non-profit, which is younger. And my first book came out. I brought that out in February, and that is about neurodivergent women. It's called The ND Lovers Club. I co-authored with Buntler Sinner, who is an ex-McKinsey management consultant turned sex coach and many, many other things. And we had a ball. It took us 2 years. And it's the strap line is how neurodivergent women lust, like, and love. And it covers everything from, do you want to have monogamy, ethical non-monogamy? Have you had abuse? Have you had domestic abuse of different kinds? Your attachment style. It's very no stone unturned. Do you tend to drink a lot when you go on dates? And why is that? And unhelpful dependencies and crutches and things. So yeah, I would say it's pretty comprehensive. And we've also had dads and granddads buy it, and mums, and people passing it to their older teenage kids, and people who want to get with a neurodivergent woman. So yeah, it had a great reception.
That is amazing. That is amazing. I haven't read it yet, but I need to. And I think that the intersection of neurodiversity and attachment styles is so interesting
Yeah.
because sometimes it's figuring out what is just our communication style. And sometimes there's friction points or mismatches. And what are the things that are actually those attachment triggers or trauma patterns?
Exactly. There's what is me and my personality, what is my attachment and my early upbringing, what is the neurodiversity, what is the complex trauma. I think the what is question is a huge thing that comes up a lot in therapy and coaching, definitely.
Yeah. Awesome. I'd love to hear more about what you do at Wired differently as well.
Thank you. So, Wired Differently, we started out with me being a therapist and coach and wanting to do something else because I didn't ever want to sit there doing that 40 hours a week. I thought that would be a bit intense. So, I was a virtual assistant. I had previously been a senior PA for a big American organization. Then I decided to scale that part and to come off the tools. I think I was a good PA. I'm definitely more a therapist and coach. It turned out that we were only working with neurodivergent people. I actually had one of my first clients kind of said, as a self-employed person, said, "Oh, this is amazing that you've set this up for ND people." And I said, "Well, to be honest, I haven't actually set that up, but I will. I mean, that's a great idea." So I ended up being a virtual assistant when I wasn't doing therapy and coaching. And that does work really nicely. But very quickly, it got really busy. And I'm not an administrator. And I was far more interested in people's challenges with why their admin was hard and executive function. And I couldn't really turn off the therapy coaching brain. So I was like, I need to just do that part. And so we grew from being a very busy virtual assistant service. We then grew the therapy and coaching. So we're now 11 of us doing that, including we do a lot to do with corporate. We do a lot to do with confidence. We have careers coaches. We have ND specialists, but they all have niches and generalisms as well. So all of them do ND. We're all about ND. Some of them specialize in, say, children and young people or addictions of different kinds or trauma. We have brain spotting, which is an absolutely incredible, very fast and effective therapy for trauma. I'm lucky enough to have had myself. That's why I brought it into the company. Yeah, lots and lots of public speaking, lots of L&D. Essentially, we're there to support professionals and students who are neurodivergent. So very often when we say neurodiversity, we think of children, we think of people who maybe have a learning disability. That is not our market. We work with professionals and students, and it's a hidden market because people just think, well, you can't be that bad. You can't be that autistic. You don't look like you've got ADHD. And we're there for all those people, the hidden people.
Yeah, it's so needed. I feel like there's this big kind of misconception that high performing equals not struggling, and someone can
Oh,
be
yeah.
performing really well in their job and massively burnt out and masking and all of this stuff, and it's not
Yeah.
sustainable.
It isn't. And it doesn't seem to matter how many tragic things we see in the news where we go, oh, we would never have known that that person wasn't okay. It doesn't seem to matter how often that happens. We still all inherently have this built in, oh, but they seemed all right. They said they were okay. I didn't ask them. They said they were
Oh, wow.
okay. And that's just not how it works. And I think anyone who has ever felt desperate knows that it's very often not conscious thought. It's a drive. I think when people get really, really low and they feel trapped and there's no other options and everything is too much, it's a drive. It's a feeling that you want to not be here. It's not so much a thought. And I think that we don't really understand that. And we're so good at just going through the motions and we're so convincing, all of us.
Yeah. I always feel like I'm bringing down the vibe when I talk about suicide
I
and
know what you
autism,
mean.
but
I was just asking myself that question.
I'm really glad you did. I'm really glad you did. I was giving a talk, this was earlier this year, and I dropped a bunch of stats about autism and suicide and the rates being 9 times higher than the general
Yes.
population. And you could just see the whole room go, oh my gosh, this is a
Yes.
lot. But the thing is, that is the reality. And I think what people aren't aware of is that it's quite often the invisible neurodivergent people, the ones that maybe don't visibly look neurodivergent, that have those even higher stats. So it's not there's, oh, well, they look fine, so they must be fine. No, those stats apply to us as well.
Oh, absolutely they do. But I think also that there is this huge expectation that someone who is autistic, for example, will automatically have an intellectual impairment. Whereas actually 50% of autistic people have no intellectual impairment or otherwise known as learning disability. And I think with ADHD, people hear learning difficulty or learning difference and they go learning disability, which is they do sound similar, granted, but they are totally different things. And that also has a different connotation of legal vulnerability, because if you have an IQ of 70 or less, it might be that your parents or someone is going to take over power of attorney of your business, not your business, but your financial affairs, your bank, or, your bills, or, they might be doing things for you that have a certain legal connotation of needing care. That's not the case for our clients, but that doesn't make them, they might not be legally classed as vulnerable with a capital V. They might not be who social services sees as vulnerable. But in the broader sense, it's no exaggeration to say that many of us at times are very vulnerable. And that's just at times, it's just one part of us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious about your own neurodiversity journey as well. When did you discover that you're neurodivergent?
Well, I think like everyone who's neurodivergent, I always knew I was different, but you don't really know how or why. So I remember at school thinking, well, could it be, that I was always told I was really bright. So I thought, well, could it be that I'm kind of gifted? I guess I didn't have that word for it back then. But my teachers, were very like, well, you can't be that gifted because you're really underperforming. It's like, I actually had one university tutor who said to me, you're really good at giving the impression that you're brighter than you are. Yeah, but unfortunately, these things are not uncommon, and universities are really quite bad offenders actually when it comes to neurodiversity. They're the first to want things like formal diagnosis in order to even make the slightest accommodation. to even have a conversation with a university very often. They're not all the same. And some universities, you get good departments, bad. But basically, I always knew I was a bit different. I felt like I was living behind double glazing. I felt like E.T. when he's touching the window and can't sort of connect with the wider world. I didn't understand it. It felt like the more people around me, the more lonely and cold I was. I felt like I had a cold, frozen heart and it wouldn't defreeze. And I could not understand why I couldn't connect. It was just really weird. It was literally like being shut out in the cold. And I think it was my repeated efforts to have friendships without RSD, which I now know what rejection sensitivity is. So on the autistic, and I mean, it's essentially a trauma response, but it's very, very linked to particularly ADHD, but more and more so with autism. And yeah, and I think it was my repeated efforts to have relationships, intimate writing a book on that topic. That meant that I just thought, I can't do this anymore. I just need to know what's wrong. Why is it that my partner at the time is going to work at sort of 11 in the morning and getting back at nearly 2 o'clock the following morning? They worked in hospitality. Why is it that I find that so claustrophobic, that it's like they're here all the time and I can't get away from them? I thought anyone else would be like, why are you even with, most people would be almost like widow of, well, why are you going out and working so much? I don't want to be with you. I felt suffocated that this person was barely there and was only pretty much there when I was asleep. And I was like, why am I so suffocated by somebody being here? This is our home. I'm a bad person. I'm not normal. And then that led to me getting the first ND diagnosis at 38. That was the autism. And then a few years later, I say a few years, we're then looking probably 4 years later, it was at the ADHD, and then the sensory processing disorder got picked up on by a specialist OT. Then it was the dyspraxia, why I kept ending up in, A&E because I couldn't just walk on a normal pavement. And then dyscalculia, though, was obvious all along because I'd never been able to get above a D in maths, and I can't imagine numbers, I can't manipulate numbers, I can't do anything with numbers, I can't remember them, I can't visualize them. Proper like a number dyslexia. So yeah, so I kind of ended up with almost a full set. I just don't have any dyslexic traits, none whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what the stats are around autism and dyslexia, but I know that a lot of autistic people tend towards even being hyperlexic and
Yes,
words being a
that's
very
true.
comfortable communication medium.
Yes, we can be kind of, we're quite verbose people. We can be quite, I mean, we're known for over explaining. I think that's because we spend a lifetime of not feeling understood. And I think maybe we are more understood than we think, but the lack of connection means, but there are many, many times where we're just not understood and we are gaslit by society as a whole, not necessarily just individuals as such. It's a very structural thing. But yes, we are generally kind of very, very good communicators, actually. And we make great public speakers and we make good teachers and lecturers. But what is going on in that? It's a person with expertise and a hyper focus and passion. Then we're not having to navigate in those situations the nuance as such, because I mean, without being stereotypical, when you're talking and lecturing, it is one way. And that doesn't mean we're not capable of interacting, but when we do interact, it's very different and it's seen as not normal. And then we get rejected when actually I think we're brilliant communicators personally. I think we've got a lot to teach the neurotypical world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that's so refreshing. I mean, I love when I receive like a wall of text from someone in
Same.
WhatsApp, like an autistic friend. I'm like, you're speaking my love language, because I love that. That's how I think. But sometimes a neurotypical person lives with that and they're like, oh,
you're so overwhelming, you're so intense,
yeah.
and then they take it as an affront. But to be honest,
Yeah.
I mean, I do know what that feels like. I've worked with people. I don't struggle with what they used to call pathological demand avoidance, which was traditionally linked to autism, but now we call it pervasive desire for autonomy. But, I've had people on my team with PDA. I manage an 85% ND team. Out of the 32 of us, the vast majority are neurodivergent. And so, a lot of us have rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And when someone can't see context, they don't understand why you've asked them to do something. When someone is then, for all of those reasons and more, including trauma, asking clarifying questions, even as an ND person, if I'm not careful or I'm a bit tired or I'm a bit like over it, I can get a bit like, whoa, this is intense. You're really overwhelming me. And it feels it feels a bit manipulative, and it feels a bit like, who do you think you are? You're taking up all this space. Like, I have got other things to do. And I'm that person as well. So I'm the boss of ND people, but I'm also the ND person that can see someone's eyes when they're like, oh, this woman's too much for me. And I know how that's a killer. I mean, that's like, one of my colleagues refers to it as a thousand paper cuts or something. It's like really, really stinging and painful and horrible. So yeah, I get it on both sides. We can be overwhelming, and if people don't know how to handle us, and if people take us maybe to the nth degree, and sometimes I need people to take me with a bit of a pinch of salt, then if you're not used to thinking that way, we can be a lot. But the problem is we are used to thinking that way. But if we think of it from a neurodivergent way, we're actually perfectly normal.
Yeah, yeah. And that phrase, I mean, being a lot or being too much comes up so much. And I think that for a lot of us, we've just been made to feel like we're too much for so long.
Yeah.
And I feel like part of the unmasking journey is just being like embracing that too muchness.
Well, so I would say I 50% agree with that. But I also feel that we are too much sometimes because we've got unresolved trauma.
Oh, yes, yes.
And I do see that, obviously, being a therapist and just being human, I've had to have a lot of therapy and coaching over the years myself. And I've massively benefited from mentors and training and goodness knows what. I know that I am not too much now. And that's really good for my self-esteem. And that's not to say that I make a living masking professionally or that I've learned to play the game. It's not that. It's just that I was too much. If I had had to deal with me at many points in my life, I was too much. And so I do think when people think we're a bit too much, it's half the fact that they don't get us. And I think we should be our beautiful selves. I do also think that if we are roaming around the world with loads of unprocessed trauma and we are responding to that and we are hyper reactive, I think we can be too much. And I think it's a bit of both. And I like to be that blunt with clients because I just feel that otherwise I'm just going to be leading them down a path where I go, yeah, accept yourself. And then all of society's going, yeah, you are actually quite hard work. And then how am I helping them? Because that is going to happen. And so, yeah, I think it's a bit 50-50, if I may.
Yeah, I think it's really brave. It's a really brave response, and I really welcome that. And I actually agree. I'm really glad you mentioned that. You're absolutely right that the message can kind of be taken to an extreme, and then people end up justifying unregulated trauma responses in the guise of unmasking, and they are two different things.
Yes. Absolutely. And I think it's important. And this is why we brought brain spotting on at Wired Differently, because I knew it to be a technique that dialed down that reactivity. And then the person could think clearly and access their resources and be creative and be thoughtful, because it's quite infantilizing. If someone just sees you as this reactive, superficial, you've got no focus, you can just be put down as superficial, not very superficially interesting, and this kind of very attractive character that deep down is not very genuine. Or I don't want that for my clients. I don't want that. They're beautiful. Like, they're flawed. I'm flawed. We're all flawed. I'm not going to romanticize anybody, but they are also beautiful, thinking, caring, loyal, deep people. And all of it is valid. The trauma is valid. I just suggest people do something about it because I don't think it's going to help them if they don't. Brain spotting isn't right for everybody. There are people that sort of just, it's too weird. It's too abstract. They're not particularly visual. It's a bit like EMDR, but 6 times faster, to put it bluntly, to put it crassly. It works on your subconscious. It's really, really, I'm amazed at the change in me. But yeah, if I don't mention that that might be an idea, and I'm not saying go and have brain spotting to dial yourself down and be palatable, but there's a risk in this being interpreted as what I'm saying, which is, I just want to highlight that. But yeah, I do think that there is always a grain of truth in something, and it doesn't help anyone if we don't listen to it. But the point is, it's a grain of truth. It's not your entire personality that you're loud and too much and unacceptable. That is not the case at all. And nobody should ever tell you that it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. I'm just really grateful for the nuance, and it's tickling my autistic love for detail and specificity, because that's true. It's just like all these any black and white things. And sometimes I see the neurodivergent community kind of hopping on a bandwagon of something's all good or all bad.
Yeah.
And we need this nuance. It's
Yeah.
also making me think of, there's been lots of talk around neuroaffirming approaches to therapy and that anything kind of behavioral is not neuroaffirming.
Yep.
I feel like that has also been taken to an extreme because obviously things like ABA are like,
Yes.
can be horrible and harmful,
Obviously. Yeah.
but it's not in the same camp as CBT and DBT. And there are
Mm.
some networks of neuroaffirming therapists that will not accept anyone who practices from a CBT modality. And because CBT is about change and changing behavior.
Well,
And I have,
yeah. And who doesn't want to do that for a better result, to be a better human? It's not about being neurodivergent or palatable. I mean, it's a bit like the social skills thing, right? I deliberately say to people, part of our work together can be designing your social skills. It's co-design. I'm not going to be like, why aren't you making eye contact on Zoom? Because that's totally inappropriate, and I don't want to have to make eye contact. I'm autistic, and personally, there are times where that is not enjoyable for me. I don't think it's helpful. So yes, I will say to someone, try being on camera for 10 minutes and not feeling shame that you can't look me in the eye or you don't want to look me in the eye, because I don't want you to look me in the eye. There's nothing I want less than to make you feel uncomfortable and take your focus away from what you're saying. But at the same time, I'm again not doing them any favors if I don't acknowledge that we live in a society. We don't all live as hermits on a hill. There are expectations that become a sort of social currency, and that you need to decide what level of that are you going to buy into it, because people need to interact. And also, how are we going to teach people to co-regulate? Autistic people sometimes think they're not made for co-regulation because they're not meant to be around people. They're sort of really socially unacceptable. But we can all admit that we do get something from being around people, even if it's simply as an ADHD, some body doubling and the hum of a cafe. There's no shame in how we people. We don't have to people in a certain way. But I'm not going to let my clients think that they're not right enough to people, that they don't deserve society and community and connection. And where are we going if that's what we're... So I think it is very characteristically very black and white in the way we see these things. And I also like nuance, because I feel that that is a sign of personal maturity. And I'm trying to instill that in people who very often have had neglect and trauma from undiagnosed ND parents from another generation or a different culture. And they need to learn to self-parent, and they need to learn to nurture themselves and connect with people. So I do think it's important that we acknowledge these things, definitely.
yeah. And that leads us nicely into, your approach to therapy and coaching. I would love to hear more about, the methodology that you've developed, what kind of modalities you work with, and
Sure.
how you decide what's right for the client in front of you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, my official training was the equivalent of a UK diploma in psychosynthesis in France.
Mhm.
I came back to the UK and I got everything transcribed, because there was a bit of a kind of, back then, 12 years ago, there was a real problem with equivalency, not just across country, but across schools, because it wasn't very academic. It was only just starting that people would study counseling in university as a main thing. I mean, obviously there were courses, but the average person was really training in private schools or adult education colleges. They were often maybe parents or older. And I'd wanted to be a therapist since I was 13 years old. This was my autistic obsession, was like yourself, changing the therapy industry. I'd barely had therapy when I wanted to change the therapy industry. But I got back to the UK from nearly 10 years in total in France, and I was trained. And I got told, look, you've kind of done a lot that's above a level of a UK diploma, and you've done a lot that's bang on, but you haven't done the basics. So I then had to go to another school, because the school of my discipline was, of course, oh no, but you worked with so and so and they're wonderful and we're in awe of them and they're a bit of a guru, but we've changed the way we do it since him. So you'll have to start from the taster weekend. And I thought, no, I don't think so. This is like a pyramid selling scheme. So I went to a school and said, look, I've done a UK diploma and above, but I never actually did the certificate level. So they said, okay, fine, you're going to find this a bit weird, and the others are going to find you a bit weird, but yes, you can come on the course. That was horrible, because I was a totally different mismatch. I'd come from a very full body, experiential, gutsy kind of course in the UK, in France, and I was told, you're going to find this a bit like a coffee morning here. It's going to be we sit in a circle, and I'm not decrying it. It was good training, but it was very different to and also I need intensity, and I even in Paris, they said to me, you have lived this way more intensely than the rest of them. So I get it was my personality. So that was how I ended up being a bit of a misfit. And then I just wasn't having it. I've always had a business head. And I thought, I have spent thousands on this internationally recognized training to now be told I'd have to start at the taste today. I just thought, I'm not buying it. This is a joke. And then it was all very, oh, but you won't be able to join the BACP. And I said, well, what if I'm not bothered by that? And that was really like, oh my goodness, that's so arrogant. And have you thought about this in therapy? And what does this bring up for you? And I was like, no, we're not going there. From a business perspective, you wouldn't get this in any other industry. And this is exactly what is wrong. Because what will happen is I'll start from day one and I'll rack up another $5,000 of debt. And I will then spend 5 years trying to build a caseload. And by that point, I will be owed so much money that my sessions will be £250 an hour and I won't be able to afford to see anyone. And then we'll say, oh, therapy is really expensive and inaccessible. So I saw it as a system from day one. And I contacted Darian Leader, who is a really eminent psychoanalyst who was very anti-regulation the last time it came up in Parliament. He wrote for The Guardian. He's got lots of books. And I contacted him and I said, I'd like some careers advice. I don't want to fall down the imposter syndrome route, but everything I'm coming across is telling me I'm not legitimate. And he was like, this is a big problem in the industry. Stick to your guns. Why don't you go and try the Independent Practitioners Network? I went to the Independent Practitioners Network and said, I can't find a supervisor because I'm not BACP and I want to be supervised. And no supervisor would just see me as I was. So they said, well, we may or may not do supervision. Not all IPN groups do it, but we will spend some time exploring. They spent 6 months having these very lovely, elaborate meetings. And I was very much like, I feel great. These people are very open-minded. And then they decided after 6 months that they were not going to include supervision. It was going to be more peer support and that we would all need our own supervisors. And I said, well, that's going to be over £100 an hour. And I am currently charging a fiver, seeing people who are in the benefit system. They're having huge results. They're all recommending me word of mouth. I was becoming a bit like Patch Adams in Gloucestershire. People were giving my card out under the table in their day jobs and saying, I'm not supposed to recommend Sara because she's a bit different, but she does get results. And I was always insured and I always showed them what I can do. And I always say what I can't do. And I did loads of CPD, but it was difficult because that system is made difficult if you don't follow the norm. And then when the IPN group I was in, because they're all independent, so this is not a reflection on that body of work, when they turned around and said, we won't be doing supervision, their attitude was very much, well, so where's your supervisor, Sara? And I said, well, hang on a minute. I've just invested 6 months of these quite onerous investigative level meetings to see if we would do that. And you've now decided we're not doing it. And now I can't function because I can't be spending all that money. This is why it's traditionally been very, very upper middle class. My husband earns good money. I'm at home. A bit like in the old days, we did charity work and it was all very ladylike. And I don't come from that background. I might speak like I do because I'm autistic. I've got formal speech, but I don't come from that background. And nothing against someone who does. A lot of my clients do, actually. And I was just like, this is rigged for people who have the money to access service. And also, when you went to the courses, when I tried to get that top-up training, when they said that I didn't have the basics, I kept being told things like, well, the thing is we're going to run it every other Saturday morning. And then there'll be a full weekend a month. And then there'll be a few full Wednesdays. And I'm thinking, I've taken on a corporate job to earn enough to pay for the training. And now you're telling me that there's no system or pattern to the days I've got to take off. And my income will drop massively because some of it will be on a weekday. So that will be another £5,000. And I'm thinking, I'm looking at 30K here just to be a counsellor, essentially. I've never wanted to say psychotherapist, or I think I'm comparable. I think if I say counsellor, I'm going to be de-skilling the years and years and years I've done and the training. I've had more training than average, way more than average. That's the irony. And then I did lots of specialisms. I trained in things like domestic abuse 4 times over. I trained in what it means to a person. I trained in hidden disabilities and assessment. I did loads to do with addiction, complex trauma. I had mentoring around sensory. And all of that has a high cost. But the system is very, very close-minded. And the idea of someone who enmeshes coaching and therapy and information, advice and guidance and quality up-to-date signposting and support work, and who knows what all of those are and what they're not, and who's very boundaried and insured and all the rest, that just, people just couldn't compute. But the thing that kept me going was that clients would consistently say, I've been told to come to you because nothing else has worked. 3 sessions in, oh my goodness, this is really changing my life. I've had therapy for years, nothing else has worked, partly because of being ND and partly because of working from that perspective. So that, because of money and the structural system and equivalency and the way that it's run like a pyramid selling scheme, which is what one of my rape crisis trainers called counseling. Incidentally, some of the best training I ever had was in the rape crisis world. I just thought no. And consistently, believe me, when in my years of imposter syndrome and RSD, I honestly thought it would really, really harm my mental health. It took me to some places where I'm not this arrogant Teflon made, I've got no feelings person. I am super sensitive, going against the tide, a new industry, going into it wanting to change it without, oh my goodness, yes, it had a real, sometimes it felt like my solar plexus was a trampoline. Honestly felt this is a lot physically and mentally, but I just kept going because I kept seeing the results. And I still do, and I love it. But a lot of therapists come to me for either therapy or coaching or both or supervision. And most of the time, they end up deregistering with the BACP. I do not tell them. I think I attract very intelligent thinking people. They're not easily swayed. I don't have an agenda, but they come out going, you know what? What's worked for me is this interdisciplinary approach, this cross support sector vision. I want to be like that. I want to free myself up to work in that way. And I say, crack on. Great. But that is what happens most of the time when I work with therapists and coaches.
Yeah. So you're attracting people who want to break out of that box.
Yeah, I seem to attract, I attract the 16s to 25s who want to learn independent skills because they are going to go to university or they're aware that mum does everything for them and mum's very aware she does everything for them and parents are worried what will happen the day I'm not here. This person's maybe getting all A grades but isn't washing their socks and doesn't know how to get up in the morning and has no routine. And I get that. I get a lot of people who are living with coercive control but generally have no idea when they get to me. I see a lot of people who are struggling at work and who are probably really actually overqualified but underperforming. And so I see a lot of tall poppies and people who really stand out in some way for being not the superpower narrative, someone who stands out for being different, and that could be a lot of the time that we get shut up is also, let's be honest, there's an agenda. It's not all about us being faulty. It's about the other person wanting to capitalize on that. Actually, anyone abusive or controlling capitalizes on any deal. So I see a lot of corporate stuff. I work with some big corporates. Yeah, self-employed people, creatives. It works.
Mhm. I'm super interested in your journey. Part of the reason why I was so intrigued to talk with you is because there's so much happening right now in the regulatory landscape.
Mm.
So, I mean, psychotherapy and counseling and coaching are unregulated in the UK. And
Yep.
so technically people don't even need any certification to practice in that way.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that that's ethically right, but that's just legally, there's no statutory requirement for it.
To be
And then
honest,
you have-
I'm anti-regulation anyway. I'm anti-regulation not because it is never okay. It doesn't matter whether you have regulation or not. It is never okay to have mission creep and overestimate yourself and use your clients as a new training ground. It's never okay to not be insured or have training and all of that. But that's not the same as regulation. And the reason, I'm sure you know that, but the reason I don't like the regulation thing is people think it's a catch-all to legitimacy. And I have had abuse in therapy. I have been told that my OCD was because I must have been abused as a child. I have been told all kinds of stuff that was totally untrue, led me to spend loads of money by people who were fully BACP, UKCP, FF2P, which is the French, or was at the time, version, people who had the European diploma. And I'm not saying those things aren't okay. What I'm saying is they didn't protect me, just like I'm not a shaman for not doing that system. Someone in that system can also be really harmful. And also, I know people who have made complaints and it's not been handled well. I know people who've had complaints made against them and it's not been handled well. And so you think, well, other than paying out this money and looking legitimate, that's actually then promoting what legitimacy is. And I just don't want to play that game, which is why I say things like, I finished my 5-year training in 2012. I don't say I qualified because I could give you certificates, but what does it mean in a non-regulated landscape? What are you going to benchmark them with? I just don't want to be fake, basically.
I think that's the important thing. It's just about transparency and customer choice, because not everyone wants a vanilla therapist that's been through the,
they don't. And something else is that when I see therapists for either supervision, I mean, often in supervision, this is where it comes out, because obviously I'm not looking at them in that way when they come as a client and in a therapeutic sense. But I see people of all levels in their counseling training. And yes, they do have to also have their BACP person, because otherwise they wouldn't get their hours validated. But they come to me because they say, well, I'm seeing that person because they're BACP and I've got to get my hours signed off. But I actually am coming to you because you get it. And, you work with, for example, ND people. And I know people who left the BACP, for example. I mean, it's not just the BACP. There's about 5 of those bodies now. But I just, people who left that because they didn't like the way neurodiversity was dealt with. They felt that, it was to a large extent being treated as a bit of a mental health issue as opposed to neurodevelopmental. And I think that what I see is a chronic lack of confidence in people. And I'm thinking to myself, I'll speak to people with maybe even master's level, which in this country is not a given, because I know in some states in America, you can't practice in the way I'm practicing here unless you have a master's in psychology. And I've never wanted to do psychology. I've always wanted to do psychotherapy, but that's a different story. But I will see people and they'll say, yes, I'm studying this, and they get it. They're definitely the right people in the role and all that. But I feel really awful for them that no one has helped them instill a sense of confidence and presence and tapping into their own hunches and connecting with their body in a session and having a dialogue with themselves and holding their views to one side and working past them to be effective, but still acknowledging that they're not this perfect, unflawed human. They're going to have opinions on their client. All of that real stuff. And that then I think makes them maybe less seen as a competent pair of hands, because the person going in is, I know my problem over the years is I've gone into therapy and within a second, I think I can't be held by this person. I'm going to be too much for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want that for my clients. But the way that these therapists are being churned out, and the politics in these courses and the control and the way that people can't make complaints and the fact that they're all these private little fiefdoms. I've got friends who are lecturers in counseling and they tell me about the world of being in that world as a teacher. And I just think, I don't want any part of that. I just don't want any part of that. Very, very political. And people talk about it more like it's just obvious, political, very insular. And it's, where are we going if that's the therapy industry? What are we supposed to be teaching people in other industries? What are we role modeling?
Yeah, then it's also the risk that the therapy industry just gets a bit too blinkered, because it's ultimately it's about human well-being. People don't come because they want therapy. They come because they want to be well and they want to be happy.
I totally agree. Totally agree. And people, let's be honest, people don't always know. They often don't know exactly what they need. They know what their presenting issue is. They can tell me what the moment was where they went, right, that's it. I need to see a professional. They don't necessarily know the difference between therapy and coaching. They don't necessarily know what support is and what signposting is and what to expect from the NHS. They don't really know how the whole system works. And it is a bit of a system. And yeah, and what are we saying? That they need to know exactly what they want before they can get help? And if a therapist only sees the therapy, I mean, I work with some great people who say, Sara, I'm a coach. You do the therapy side. I need you to see them. I'll be like, fine. but I also know what my colleagues do and what I don't do. But most people working in the therapy industry that I've come across in my life, and I'm now 47 and I've always been obsessed with therapy as a business, most people just do what they do. So they sort of see what they see, do that bit. But I mean, what about the people that have been to see therapists for 20 years or more on Harley Street and no one has ever said, you might want to get tested for autism? I see people with anger and trauma from therapy and doctors because they've had that trust. And we can't see everything all the time, but most private therapists have no training in domestic abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Most private therapists have no training in anything that is practical. And I'm sorry, but people don't have the money for these abstract conversations and navel gazing. Like, it's important to analyze and work out how you got here. And yes, you could say, well, that's the coaching side about how are you going to move forward. And that's why I have a hybrid. I don't want to silo support. For me, we're all supporters and helpers. I don't care what anyone calls me, to be honest. As long as my insurance covers me for what I'm doing and I'm trained and experienced and the feedback is good and people are safe, you can call me what you like. You can call me a befriender, supporter, listener, helper. I'm not attached to the title. I just want to get the job done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of this, it is the infighting within the industry, because I think from the perspective of the people that you are helping and serving, they are not looking, they don't even know what the BACP is. People are not deciding on a therapist based on that. It is, can you help me? And I think that that's one of the things that I'd love to make it clearer for people is how can they identify what kind of help they need?
100%.
Sometimes people have had frustrating experiences and they go, oh, I had therapy, but it didn't really help me. And then they just give up on it.
Well, that's the norm. That is actually the norm, because people were coming to me for so long saying, I've had therapy all my life, but nothing's working. I then felt I had a duty, because I had the skills, to help them and support them and to see if what I did worked. And 99% of the time, you can just see very quickly, people will go, oh yeah, no, this is fine, because that something clicks. But the norm is that people say, and they're not always negative. Some of them will say, yeah, to be fair, I got a bit out of that and they were nice and it was useful and I learned some techniques, but that's it. It's always, there's no, oh, wow, that really was a big thing in my life. And I feel that given the size of the stuff they're coming with, you need to equal that in a way with the impact you're having. You can't just be sitting there nodding. Who has the money for that? Who doesn't feel insulted? And these are professionals. They know that in their sector, they would not be paying a certain amount per hour, putting up with someone nodding at them and repeating everything back to them parrot fashion. They know that that wouldn't be good enough in any other field. So why should it be good enough in therapy? People need you to show up for them, and they're not stupid and they're not children. And I find it really infantilizing sometimes, the way people overprotect clients in a way that I find actually really inappropriate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's the stereotype, isn't it? In media and the way that therapists are represented is this very blank screen.
Yes.
And I think even if you are sticking within the confines of more like regulated therapy, there are modalities that are so upfront and directive and even confrontational.
Yes.
People need to know that's out there, because personally, the therapy that had the most impact on me was dialectical behavior therapy and schema therapy. She was a behaviorist to her core. It was like, don't come here and moan for an hour, do something to change it. And she was amazing. I was there for 5 years. She changed my life.
Oh, that's wonderful. I mean, to hear that process changed your life, I feel that we should be hearing that more. And I don't want to change someone's life. I want the process that we engage in to change someone's life. But also, if you look at it from a cultural perspective, I think ever since I contracted to a Harley Street practice, I've had more international clients. And I think since the pandemic, we're online and I do public speaking abroad. So you get international clients. There are countries that have social dynamics that mean that it is not appropriate to be a blank slate. You are expected to have a bit of an authority because you are the professional of the two in that particular situation. And there are times it's not appropriate to be too egalitarian or too self-deprecating and too British. But there are also times where it's not appropriate to be like that. And I've always, if anything, I had to really change for certain markets because I was the very egalitarian. My actual value as a person is I'm in this chair today as professional, you're in that chair as client. But tomorrow, you could either be in my chair because maybe you are a therapist, or you could be in another chair being someone else's support, boss, dad, mum, whatever. You have your own professional standing, competency. You have all of those things. I'm literally just doing a job in relation to your specific context. That doesn't make me anything other than your equal in a different role in this context. And I do believe in that. So this blank slate and someone just nodding, I mean, I just think people think they're just taking the mickey, you know? Who has the money for that?
Mhm. Mhm. Yes, this to my kids.
No, it's, and even if you have the money, and actually the sad thing is that some of my clients very much do have the money, but they've not found the help. And they're kind of like, well, my problem isn't that I couldn't afford it. It's that you could have told me to spend my money, but who am I going to spend it on? I can't find someone who's right for me. And I think that's partly the ND thing. I think also we live in a tech time. People are encouraged to optimize the SEO on their website. They will accentuate words because of hits on the website. So you'll literally go on client therapy websites and they'll have an A to Z of all the things that they allegedly work with. It will be like from addiction all the way down to, say, phobia or sexology or something. And it will literally be for the SEO. And you're kind of like, you can't be an expert in 26.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's just generally like it would do with like independent business. People are so scared of niching.
Yeah. Also, most therapists have had no business training.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is a problem. I once went to a sales conference for therapists. It was painful. The amount of hand wringing. And, I feel that this is really difficult, right? Because if you're working with people who are wanting their kids to get on in life, not that earning is the only way of getting on. If you're wanting your kids to get on in life and you want a bit of a role model for your client, or at least a therapist that models the right values. And if you're in corporate and maybe you're earning a certain amount or whatever, or you live in a certain city or whatever, where the salaries are higher, you don't want this therapist that's got this under-earning phobia and they need to go to Under-Earners Anonymous, or that is everything's so ethical. I can't make any money. Oh no, it's not pure enough. It's not. I call that graduate syndrome. You come out of university all wide-eyed and no job is perfect enough or ethical enough, and you've got to look at every angle, but you end up unemployed and working in Starbucks, right? Believe me, I was many years in minimum wage jobs in hospitality. I definitely came from that mindset. And it's not healthy, because what industry is it can survive on a load of people with no business training who are embarrassed to make money because it's unethical and it's distasteful, and that's just not the real world. And it just doesn't, even if you're ND and you're by nature not particularly money oriented, not everyone, but a lot of NDs are not money orientated. And even so, if somebody is chronically afraid of posting on LinkedIn because it's terribly disingenuous, or they're chronically afraid of charging or a cancellation fee, there's just no boundaries. And then what are you doing with the client?
Mhm. Yeah.
Where is the holding? Yeah.
Yeah. And this is also part of the tension between therapy and coaching, because I feel like a lot more coaches are more business savvy, but
Yeah.
have far less training. And as you know, like the training for therapy is expensive, long, intense.
Painful.
Yeah, like it changes you inside and like transforms your whole life as you're doing the training.
Oh, that's
And not
really
to,
weird about training, isn't it? It's not like training anything else. You're just like, yeah, it's inside out. It's such an odd process. Yeah.
yeah, but not to undervalue coaching, because I mean, I'm a coach as well.
Yep.
But it is a very different process. It doesn't turn you inside out in the same way. It's not the same level of depth. And yet coaches are charging 500 a session, 2 grand a session, like just in extortionate amounts.
Yep.
And I feel also part of it is regulatory, again, because of the big regulating bodies, which are not legally required. Again, they're all voluntary.
They're all
But
voluntary.
they have these requirements that you need to be anonymous. People shouldn't be able to find you online and that
Yeah.
kind of thing, which is just so out of date. It's like, what century are we in? And also,
I know.
people deserve to know who they are being supported by.
Well, it's really tricky, isn't it? Because actually, that also is very black and white. You get your therapists online almost, well, actually divulging things. Like you get people comment on posts or things or do posts, and people would be recognizable. Totally, totally wrong. But then you also get people saying, I never talk about my work online. It's so distasteful. And I'm like, but how is it not helpful? Most of the time, weirdly, and I don't know if this is an ND thing, I suspect it is. I get a lot of clients say to me, well, I didn't go through that for nothing. So if you can make use of that with anyone else, or if you come across anyone with that and you want to tell them the broad lines of what I've, and I'm like, I get that, because I think when you are in pain, there's an element of what was that for? And if you can't have that, it's not just catharsis, it's kind of sublimation. You're sort of sublimating it into something beautiful and creating something out of it. Sublimation is very important in pain and crisis, right? So I get that. And I just feel that we've either got people online who look incredibly unboundaried and actually fragile. I say that as someone who for many years was the fragile, and really kind of wearing their heart on their sleeve to a degree that is eye-watering. And then you get the other people that are so hand-wringy, and their entire online presence is berating therapists for not being ethical enough. But then if you're in the middle, you've also got to be careful that you're not sort of being authentic, but wrapping it up in LinkedIn language to be inspiring. So it isn't easy showing up online. I just made a decision 5.5 years ago when I started as an actual self-employed person at Wired Differently, as opposed to just being me as a therapist. I made a decision that I would just be me, and I would always be careful that I fact check or I give sources, because to me that's important, and be clear when it's my opinion and not overstep, but be me. And what shocked me was I posted some meltdowns. So, for example, there was a whole period where airports would trigger these huge off the scale meltdowns, and I would post about it. And that got me to meet with the head of customer service for the whole organization of British Airways. It got me to contribute to white papers and be part of roundtables. So it was all very positive. But the surprise, because I just saw that as advocacy, again, sublimating and turning something into a positive. Again, I would then get DMs from people going, I can't like your post because my boss will see, but thank you for saying that about, I was on Manjaro and there were women going, I've got it in my fridge, but my husband will not let me take it. And I really, really want to take it. I also have meltdowns, but my corporate colleagues don't know. But then I'd get loads of client requests. And I would think, God, if I was neurotypical and they were neurotypical, they'd think I was quite unhinged. But because I'm neurodivergent, it's just seen as, oh, you're authentic. I can trust you. But I never, ever posted on LinkedIn to get paying clients out of those sorts of posts. I was more shocked than anyone that people would go, actually, could you be my therapist? Because I didn't do it for that. I didn't think that that would happen. But I can understand in hindsight how that happens. But I just don't think neurotypical therapists would get it. I don't think they would give them clients. It's a very, very different way of being.
I feel just the whole idea of self-disclosure is this sacred cow that I feel it's a real opportunity, because I feel like it's valuable for everyone. And there is research showing that when therapists use self-disclosure, they're perceived as more helpful, more trustworthy, the therapy is more beneficial.
Yeah.
And so much of the training is saying, do not share about yourself.
Yeah.
We relationship with people sharing sometimes the most intimate parts of their lives. Just to hold so much of that back, it just doesn't make sense in my opinion.
I know. And something I do, and I have done all 12 years of practice, is I have a WhatsApp system where people can WhatsApp me 24/7. My phone is on silent, or this particular phone is on silent. All my chats are archived, thumbprint and password protected, and WhatsApp is encrypted. Save space for them to leave me short, cut up little voice notes, or it's hard to get through them. Send me text, which I can read quite quickly. And the idea is, don't leave a diary lying around saying you might leave your partner. Don't slag off your kids or have a meltdown. Just put it somewhere safe between you and I will read it before I see you. You will remember on Thursday that you had a meltdown on Sunday and what exactly it was you booked the session for, rather than sitting there going, "Oh, I don't know what I'm here for now." It's all good. You say that to a therapist. Oh my goodness. I am the most unhinged, unsafe charlatan they've ever heard of. That is a total violation of boundaries. I'm encouraging dependency. And I'm literally giving them a dumping ground to update me before I see them. They know I'm going to spend 10 minutes reading it, not more. They know that if there's reams of it, I will not reasonably be able to get through it. They also know that I won't answer unless they put a really obvious "oi" in that 1-minute voice note. There's a question. And they also know that there are times I may not get to see it before the session because it will be Sunday night and they're seeing me 9 a.m. Monday morning. All of that is perfectly acceptable for a grown adult to understand. They're not vulnerable in that sense. They don't have an IQ of 70 or less. And yet, unbelievable. And I'm like, but that could just be a phone in my drawer. There's just this unbelievable pearl clutching. And I'm like, but that is very often what has built relationships with my clients. But I've even asked therapists if I could do that, even to a tiny degree, because it would really, really help. And I've been told, well, you'll need to, I did see my supervisor and it's going to be another £20. And I'm like, right, okay. Yeah, of course it is. Like, whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever makes you think that you have a boundary that you don't have, which is why you've got to charge that to feel like you have a boundary. And then I'm just kind of like, this is so inflexible as to be unbelievable. In 2025, this is not okay.
So relational. And then you see why people will want to work with an unqualified coach instead, because they will offer that wraparound support.
Yes.
Can you share the reaction of those therapists to what you've shared, which to me, I think that sounds like a great service. And again, I think I'm kind of really lucky that I had quite an unconventional therapist for the bulk of my
unconventional. It's a privilege, right? We benefit from that.
It's got me to question so many of the supposed norms, because part of dialectical behavior therapy within that training for that modality is this intersession support. So it is the norm for dialectical behavior therapy therapists to allow that contact via email or text in between sessions.
I didn't actually know that. I read books on DBT. I've never had it. And I never knew that was a thing in that modality when someone is an actual DBT therapist. That's fascinating. Okay.
Yeah, because the idea is that you're learning skills, and this is often quite vulnerable people who may be in crisis or whatever, or even if you're not in crisis, skills are learned in the moment.
Yeah.
So why, instead of just watching the train wreck happen and then picking up the piece at the next session, why not work in that moment? Yeah. That's what the therapist is providing, that skills-based support. So it's not even just a repository. This client would share what's going on, and then the therapist would share skills-based interventions for that moment.
No, I think that 100%. We learn by doing. And it's not all about go and read this or that book. And sometimes it's about, why don't you try that thing we just discussed and WhatsApp me and tell me how it was for you? Or I hate my own voice. Okay, why don't you leave me a voice note and see how it feels? What comes up when you're leaving me a voice note in a safe space? Because I do public speaking coaching. And sometimes I think your voice is a big part of being here now and showing up and not being invisible. And it's part of why someone can't post on LinkedIn. It's part of why they can't build their brand. So I do ND business coaching because very often I've had so much business training, business mentoring, accelerators, the startup community. I've done so much of that, actual formal qualifications. I just started doing it because what was happening was people were coming to me and they were going, right, well, I sort of feel like I'm as okay as I'm going to be for the moment, and maybe I'll need you in the future. But do you now do business stuff? Because now I'm feeling better. I now want to change career, or I want to, have a better business, or be self-employed, or I've realized now I don't want to be self-employed. I want to go and get a job. So it's nice to be able to go, yep, and we can hold that. We can do that too. And people are generally like, this is great because it's a one-stop shop. And if I can't do it, I've got my 11 associates, and they love that because they get a mix of genders, age groups, backgrounds, people who are more or less corporate, people who might want their kids to see. And the ND thing is very much, I don't want to have multiple relationships with multiple people. And the fact it's all under one umbrella tends to give people, I get feedback like every single person I've dealt with at Wired Differently has been nothing short of caring and generous and out of the box thinkers. And we get that a lot. We recently went out, actually, we were applying for an award and we asked a few people, would you do a testimonial? And we didn't give any guidance. We just said, send us a voice note, we'll type it up. And everyone went into the bit about this is a one-stop shop. And that's really helpful for me because therapy is siloed enough. Support is siloed enough. And also the public and private don't speak to each other. I do loads of work with doctors, nurses. I do the training of medical teams in pharmaceutical companies. I love tying up public and private charities, but charities will very often only talk to the public sector and vice versa. Therapists are traditionally seen as charlatans, outsiders, profiting off people's, it's like if you're in the public sector or charity, you're still on a wage.
Mm.
I've even had people say in meetings going, Sarah, would you be available for that meeting? And what would your fee be in front of a whole board of people? And I'm kind of like, well, I'm assuming everyone around this table is paid, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we're all here for work. Okay, good. I just wanted to establish that because you keep bringing up my fee and it's really feeling as though as the private person, I'm different, but actually we are all being paid to be here. It's so not okay. And then it really makes the client feel guilty and like they put you in a bad position and that they can see you being ganged up on. I've had doctors ring me and go, who on earth do you think you are? Asking this person has come in and asked me if they could be tested for this. I'm like, right. Who do you think you are? Who are you anyway? Who do you work for? Who regulates you? And one day the same doctor who had did that kind of call, I've had people ring me and say, you're threatening our funding. You need to stop what you're doing. This was in the old days. I don't do it now. But I even had the same doctor one day in his defense after the session with the client left the surgery and he rang me and he said, I owe you an apology. He said, what you do for this guy. He said, the thing is, no one else does what you do. And for me, there's no pigeonhole, which rings alarm bells of you're a bit of a sort of lone ranger, a bit of a loose cannon. But he said, I've sat here and listened to that guy and I've got to hand it to you. Like, I wish that more people were doing this. And I was kind of like, well, if they're going to get the ear bashing you just gave me, it would put a few people off. And that's horrible for imposter syndrome. This sector is awful for making you feel like you're dangerous if you're not voluntarily regulated. And actually, that's really awful thing to insinuate to someone, knowing full well that the system is voluntary for a reason. And the last time it came up in Parliament, they said this is about client choice. It will always be about client choice, and we don't wish for this to be represented in Parliament, were the official documented words.
Yeah, and that's become so isolating for those therapists and practitioners who are not part of those regulating bodies.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm kind of straddling it right now because I came from an unconventional therapy background, so quite parallel to you. So was trained as a coach, was trained in root cause therapy, was not BACP accredited, and I'm just in the home stretch of finishing my level 4 to get that level 4 BACP accreditation.
Interesting.
So,
fascinating that you've done it that way. Okay.
Yeah, and it is long, and it's like you say, everyone's at different levels in that training. And I've been working with people for so many years. And it's just like, you know, two people could have a level 4 certification and just have completely different approaches to being therapists.
Well, you must be a total oddball, because I was an oddball 12 years ago and now it's got much more obsessive. So how on earth was your imposter syndrome in classes, having teachers going, what, you already see client? What, and you weren't? I mean, how have you survived? Because that was not a nice feeling.
I know. I'm very, very fortunate in that in my level 4, my tutor is also a coach and a therapist. And so he gets working from a blended approach. He understands the idea of working with different modalities. So he's just like intrigued. And so I've felt really supported in that. So yeah, I'm definitely like, I have been told, and he said it to me in a really nice way. He said to me, you are a disruptor. And he meant it as a compliment.
Yes.
So I was really I've been really encouraged by it. But I really feel for I mean, like the strength of character it takes to stay voluntarily unregulated. I mean, it was doing my nut, which is part of why I've gone this route.
It was doing my nut. It did my nut for about, I only got rid of the imposter syndrome properly around 4 years ago. So I had 8 years of just feeling like I'm wrong, I'm bad, I'm arrogant. Who do you think you are voice? That was loud. Was super
Yeah.
loud, especially
Yeah.
before I moved to London. I think London is full of people who've spent their life being told, who do you think you are? And they all come to London because I've never once in London thought, who do I think I am? I just feel like me. But before, and it's probably also psychological, I'm sure there are people who don't get that at all. But my who do you think you are voice, especially as a woman, as an ND person, it was loud. And I salute you as well for having that and going into the system for all the right reasons. And you've thought it through. And can I ask you, what is your main motivation for deciding to go through that kind of funnel in the end?
Because I want to be able to work with charities to support people in need who might not be able to access it through private means.
I
It's
get
the
that.
accessibility angle. So I want to be able to just offer that scope of support. It offers more pathways, I think, for collaborating with in that route because they often ask for a specific
I
type
get
of
that. I get
representation.
that. And some employee assistance programs as well. I mean, I have never not got work because of not being voluntarily regulated. But then my path is so weird and I've had to make the opportunities, and that was really hard. I had a social enterprise years and years ago, and I worked with a lot of people in the benefit system. And I think money is a big part. I think that I was able to provide something they couldn't afford, and I didn't need to charge. And I was able to do it in spaces that were maybe donated or somehow private. It felt awful. I mean, I literally felt this. I felt like some dodgy extremist giving out some sermon or something, and everyone, some really bad Pied Piper, and I was like negatively manipulative. Or I just was like, oh, constantly checking myself. Am I safe? Am I a good person? Is it me? I've very rarely met someone who knows what that felt like. And this is just when we got in contact with each other, I was just like, wow, this is great actually to reflect on this.
Yeah, thank you. I'm also, as we're kind of approaching the end of this, it's absolutely flown by. We could probably talk for
It
5 hours
has flown
on this.
by. Yeah, hopefully it will for the people listening as well.
Definitely. Well, I'm thinking, I mean, and I know some people who are really going to enjoy this conversation as well, because I'm thinking of other fellow therapists who are on the outskirts in terms of their practice being non-traditional, but still having so much passion and expertise. And I'm really thinking of them in this conversation as well. So do you have any advice for therapists who are listening who may be in a slightly untraditional box of what they can do to have support and to overcome that imposter syndrome?
Well, I want to say find your tribe, but you're talking about non-traditional therapists, and I sort of wasn't around any really. I have people who are voluntarily regulated but have quite out of the box ideas, but they have to toe the line. Yeah, I mean, I would say find your tribe, but that's not what I did. There wasn't one to find, but then that was 12 years ago. And I suppose creating Wired differently means I've sort of created a tribe of sort. I guess when you own a company, you do. But yeah, be around people who validate it. I mean, Darian Leader had a huge impact on me because the minute I saw his articles in The Guardian when it last went to Parliament, this is a kindred soul. I need to reach out to him. And I actually was in contact with him recently saying, this is where I am now. And I'll never forget what you told me and everything. And that email from him, or emails, really was great. I also emailed Evan Dialom in the States, who's, well, now, I mean, he's probably retired, but back then he sent me this email. It was really funny. He said, look, I'm far too old and tired to deal with your level of intensity and passion, but I wish you were.
Morning.
It was amazing. But those two emails were so validating because these famous people had personally emailed me back at least. And it was really nice, but that was in the absence of real life people in my life. So I would just say, yeah, look for the different people who you relate to, reach out to them. But I would say avoid spaces where you know that your views aren't welcome, because you don't need that. You don't need that, especially not being shamed on social media. I don't really do very many I'm on the Autistic Therapists and Counselors group on Facebook. I find that very helpful. But that's the only time I've ever been in a group of therapists, because I just find it gets very bitchy, very negative, and I feel that people get very dysregulated and they can't say why they feel something. They get so overly passionate that then you can't reason with people because it all becomes too heated. So I think it's about who you frequent and who you choose not to frequent, because you already feel like a fraud and imposter. You don't really need that. And do find a supervisor who can hold you. I have a wonderful supervisor who is BACP and UKCP and 38 years of experience, but he's also not afraid of me. He doesn't see me as a threat. In fact, to be honest, I think he calls my supervision consultancy, which I'm totally fine with. I don't need him to call it anything particularly. So yeah, you will find people, and just keep checking in with yourself that you're doing it for the right reasons, and look at the difference it's making with clients. If you're consistently getting I mean, don't get me wrong, we don't always have people delighted at all times with everything we're going to say and do. But if generally speaking, people are really delighted to work with you, they're seeing real great things, you've got the right insurance, business wise, you've had some training, you know what you're doing, crack on. The world needs more people like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That was an amazing answer. And I feel like you've just hit on so many criteria for how you can be an ethical and safe practitioner that has nothing to do with who is signing off on you being a therapist.
Yes.
It's, being trained, having supervision, reflecting on your own practice, that transparency about how you practice.
And making sure that you look after your own health. And I do, maybe this is a controversial take, I do think we have a duty to be a role model and not to put on a mask and then have a real shit show behind us. I'm not saying we can't be vulnerable and we can't have problems. And I'm not saying that I went through periods where I had functional freezes. I would be, many years of my life, I would maybe over depend on things like sleep, or I'd have 2 glasses of wine most evenings, or there would be, but you need to be constantly working on that. You need to be trying to become your best self at all times, because we need a minimum level of functioning. Otherwise, what are we actually training people for? And they don't want someone who's just doing the thing, but in their own life. Like, there needs to be some kind of organic, holistic, and we really need to learn to rest when we're ND, not burn ourselves out, because these are the things our clients are coming to us for. And there's nothing worse than thinking that you're saying all this to someone, but that actually you're not doing it yourself. Like, that will give you imposter syndrome, because you are actually at that point a bit of an imposter.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I do think we should be role models. We don't need to be perfect, but we do need a minimum level of functioning, and we do need to get our own house in order. Otherwise, I just feel that there's a real problem with congruence.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. We have to take our own medicine.
We do have to take our own medicine, and that is not all about going, oh, I'm super vulnerable, look how vulnerable I am, and I'm like you, and you're vulnerable, and we're all equal. It's like, no, I think clients need a bit more than that. They need us to actually have our shit together without being blunt. And I'm not saying for the last 12 years I did have. It was definitely a process. I put a lot of work in, and I'm not saying that life will ever be perfect, but to be a congruent therapist and coach, I felt it was important to get my shit together.
Oh, last question for now, and maybe we'll have a part 2 someday to unravel more of this. But, this is a big question, but I would love to hear what you think. If you could wave a magic wand and change something about the way the wellness industry works or the therapy space, what would you change?
Training.
Mm.
Training does not include actual life problems that put people under real psychological pressure. Things like debt can have a massive impact on someone's mental health. Most people are in total denial of the debt they're in. I think everyone who's in therapy and coaching should understand domestic violence. It's so prevalent. They should understand power dynamics, intersectionality. They should understand the difference between an ND person in therapy and not. Training. It's absolutely shocking. People are coming out of therapy schools not understanding how to recognize very common mental health issues. And it's just, and then we criticize people for trying to get their learning off social media. I mean, what are you supposed to do? Yeah, training needs to be fit for purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fit for purpose. And isn't also something about the regulation of that training, or I'm just about how you had such extensive experience in France, and
Yeah.
then that was somehow not translatable here. How can we, because really there's so many different approaches to helping people. How can we allow that plurality while still having a standard of quality?
Oh, well, the training in France was a lot more physically intense. We did exercises that probably wouldn't even be legal here. They were hands-on, and it was all very, but there's a lot to do with how I've practiced over the years now. I think I could go to France and hold my own, but for a long time they would not have liked the way I practiced because they're much more into the rule following and regulation. If I moved to France, I'd probably have to call myself a life coach. If I moved to the States, I don't even know if I'd be able to say life coach. There's a real context there. And I think, to be honest with you, this question reminds me a bit of what do we do about the state of neurodiversity supporting corporates? I think we acknowledge that we have a heck of a long way to go, and this is going to be messy, and people's values and beliefs are going to get in the way. And I think we just crack on and deal with that in our own way. Maybe individually, we just do our best, and that will create a movement. I'd actually rather people just cracked on and had the guts to do it their way, safely and supported, but their way. Because the more of us do that, that will create a movement. I don't want a movement that's top down where we all start having meetings, because it's got to be about evidence mind shifts and evidencing what these clients are getting out of working with us and seeing results, not talk, because talk doesn't change values and beliefs to a degree. You've got to actually embody and shift stuff. And that comes from us all just cracking on and earning a living. And actually, the need to earn a living is great, because if we take away the need to earn a living, there's a real dynamic and a sort of energy that we're missing in order to effectuate change. Having to earn a living sometimes is what's made me have to swallow my imposter syndrome and carry on supporting people. And that was brilliant. Starting a business with nothing and having to earn money from day one was brilliant, because I couldn't make bad decisions. I couldn't take on debt. I couldn't invest in all these people going, if you give me £5,000, I'm going to get you to six figures within the year. I couldn't do any of that. I just had to go, no thanks. And that was brilliant. So having to earn a living is great. And if everyone just carries on building their little house, we'll eventually have a hamlet and a village and a town and a city, and the movement will just happen. And then that is also within our power. It's not overwhelming, because I can get overwhelmed thinking about, I used to get very sick and overwhelmed thinking about the therapy industry. Now I just focus on me and what I can do to do my bit. And that is far more empowering.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. And here's to that, just these conversations starting to bring to life and connect those people, that movement. I mean, to me, this is about liberation. Like, that's the ethos behind reimagining therapy. It's like liberation oriented therapy that's liberating us from structures that are oppressing us, whether it be as clients or therapists.
100%. How are we supposed to work with these difficult power structures and abusive power structures when we've been indoctrinated by the therapy industry? I think that it starts with therapy schools playing this conversation and seeing what the fallout is, because I would imagine that people will have quite strong reactions to this conversation, and that's okay. And we can look at that, but we can't just go explosive and then not change. So maybe it starts by diffusing this conversation and having more of them, and then seeing how people react and respond.
Yeah, absolutely. So if anyone is listening has any feedback, please do send it, because it's a springboard. All feedback is welcome. It will be used as topics for further discussion. This is an open, ongoing conversation. And Sarah, thank you so much for being here today. It's been absolutely amazing to
Thank
hear
you.
your experience, to hear your journey, to hear your like freedom oriented mindset and your rigor for what you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope to do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. Before you go, can you share how people can stay in touch with you, follow you, your book name again, and all of that?
Yes, absolutely. So mainly on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I know a lot of people hate it, but I promise you I'll make you love LinkedIn because I'm only connected with people in the DEI space and people who use it very differently to what we did before the pandemic. My book is, together with Bunkler Sena, is called the ND Lovers Club. It's how neurodivergent women lust, like, and love. I just happen to have one on the chair because someone asked me to post them one. And it's available not just from Amazon. I know not everyone likes Amazon, but also from the shop on the Wired Differently website, which is wireddifferently.co.uk.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And yeah, I will see you on LinkedIn and looking forward to chatting to you again soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.